guys, it's Bryn from the Mama on the Rocks, and we are in our extreme parenting community. It's a private Facebook group, and we are all extreme parents or caregivers or teachers or professionals who directly work with extreme children in some capacity. And we are here today with one of my most favorite people in the land, Sydney P, who I absolutely adore and have a major girl crush on. And she is licensed in basically being a boss, being awesome. And she's a licensed therapist. And she also, what I think is cool is that she has a lot of different specialty areas that are ones that I think all of us really have used or wish we could access. So she is, and correct me if I say any of this wrong, Sydney, licensed play therapist, right? Do what? Is there like a lag?
Just a little bit.
Okay. So Sydney works with families, she works with individuals, she works with kids. She's also a supervisor for clinical mental health and students coming out of grad school that want to be therapists, and so she oversees what they're doing. She has a lot of really awesome and kind of innovative ideas working with kids like ours as far as play therapy is concerned. Like in her office, she has like this big awesome like table, and was it a sand table? I know you guys do a lot of like, and it's just so rad and like stuff that I would never think of to work with kids like ours, both for sensory stuff as well as just kind of expressive therapy. And so Sydney has talked to us before. If you haven't watched her previous interview, go back in the archives. They're all accessible for you guys if you're in the group. But tonight what I wanted to talk about with her was motherhood, because what I've noticed more than anything is just this common theme in both the things that I've been writing about because of stuff I'm dealing with, as well as y'all's responses. And I am the one that reads every comment. I am the one that responds to every comment. It's just me. And I feel like we're all kind of in this proverbial sinking ship right now, or at least it feels like that. Because we're balancing whether it's coming out of quarantine, we were a month ago, we're all figuring out what are we going to do for school. Now we've got our kids homeschooled, in-schooled, virtual school, dual, whatever. I mean, everything's just a freaking cluster. And so we don't really know what we're doing. And I feel like it's becoming really overwhelming, and it's really affecting mental health, I think, not only for our extreme children, but as moms. I think we tend to forget about, it's easy for us to put self-care on the shelf, as Sydney likes to say, we'll just put it on the shelf. It's easy to put that on the shelf because we don't have time to deal with it, or we feel like we don't deserve it, or we feel guilty for taking that time. But ultimately, if we don't do that, we're not giving our best to our kids or our spouse or ourselves or our community or whomever it is we're spending our time with. So I just really want to use the next 20 minutes or so talking to Sydney and answering questions, if you guys have those, about what are some practical tips we can implement to just manage motherhood better? Because right now I feel like we're all struggling. So Sydney, if you would just give me a little bit of background about just your passion for, I know you work with a lot of women and just empowerment, and you have a lot of really awesome perspectives on things like that and working with families and mothers, and you're a mom. And so if you could just give us a little background on that before we kind of get into it tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys so much for having me. And I am like a chronic over planner with talks like this. So I have a bunch of different stuff that I wanted to try to share in a small amount of time. In particular, that anxiety that I think all of us have been feeling. We feel it anyway as parents, as mothers, but especially right now, dealing with our children in a time, in a global pandemic, and what that means for us, in attempting to manage all the things that are difficult to manage anyway. And then, hashtag global pandemic kind of kicks everything into high gear. So I'm super passionate about working with families, and excited to share a little bit about just some better ways to manage some of these things with you all tonight. If you all, I'm going to go kind of fast, so if you all have any questions, if you all will stop me. And, anytime that you all want to reach out in the parenting group, you're more than welcome to.
Yeah, and you guys, Sydney is somebody that oftentimes will put things in there that are just additional to the freebies I give on Mondays, where she'll just say like, hey, I thought this was really cool. And I love that coming from a therapist perspective, that stuff that she comes across, she shares in there, because I think that's so crucial for us to be able to see from a different perspective. Because a lot of times it's tunnel vision for extreme parents, right? And it's like, I got to keep this kid alive and make sure he and everybody else is safe. And so it's hard to sort of, everything else kind of just falls away. Mm-hmm. So just jump right in and let's get into it, and we'll stop you if we have questions as we go.
Yeah, and just to speak about that really quick, I come across so many things just in terms of like, therapist blogs and stuff that I'm a part of. And so I try, just kind of going with what you just said, Bryn, like I come across so much stuff. I don't want to bombard you all with resources and things that I think might be of interest. So if anybody ever needs something specifically or wants help with something, if you just want to reach out or ask Bryn about it, and we can hook you up with some kind of with some resources. I told my little girl who's 7 that I was going to be talking about, talking to mamas tonight about anxiety. And I said, well, Reese, what do you think I should tell them about just how to manage their anxiety? And she said almost immediately, she said, you probably should tell them to dunk their head in cold water and erase their memories.
I'm telling you what, that girl has a future in therapy. Yes.
I'm like, well, like a lobotomy, or like, I didn't explore it too much because I was like, that's interesting. I thought at least it gave me a good story to start with. But so I want to make 2 points to kind of get started about managing the workload of motherhood. And the first one is how important it is to own and understand and address our own anxiety, and how that impacts us in every aspect of our life, but especially as moms, as we parent. We typically interact with our own anxiety as if it's some sort of monster that controls us and gets the best of us. And I think our kids feel that way too about their anxiety. We tend to think of it as this monster that likes to control us and boss us around. And what I try to encourage people to think about, kind of switching your mindset of anxiety being something that you own and that you control and that you're the boss of. We tend to make our experience of anxiety worse sometimes because of the way that we feel about our own anxiety. So I call it anxiety times 2. We tend to be incredibly anxious about how we are experiencing anxiety. And I think that we also do that with our kids too. We're anxious about their anxiety, the same we are with our own. So this looks different ways, but I want you to think about your experience of anxiety and what tends to drive that. Because if you understand a bit about your reactions, it can clue you in to how to address those things. So understanding what drives the anxiety that you experience in your parenting. The ways that our anxiety manifests in parenting is congruent with the ways that it manifests in general in our lives, okay? So is it related, are those triggers related to trauma that has happened to us, so it causes us to over-respond in situations? Is our anxiety a defense mechanism or a way that we're trying to protect ourselves from our perception of some sort of threat? Is it driven by our insecurities, by negative beliefs about other people or about our own self or our world? Is it unresolved trauma? that's playing out in our parenting? Is it related to our own unmet needs and lack of self-care? Is it about parenting to what I call parenting to perfection, where we have this mindset that if we're the perfect parent, the outcome is perfect kids without problems? Lack of self-care, self-nurture. So I just wanted to start there in terms of the ways that we kind of understand our own anxiety, because often when we are in a hyper-aroused state, we have a tendency to just react rather than really trying to understand and to do things like, see a therapist or talk to our friends about things that drive that anxiety. Any questions related to that before I kind of move on to the second thing that I wanted to talk about related to that?
I was just going to ask, can you give an example from a therapeutic perspective? I know how I've seen this play out in my own life. Self-care is foreign to me. It is difficult for a lot of reasons. I feel really guilty. And, I think that's a common feeling. But can you talk about, from a therapeutic perspective, what are the drawbacks if we decide to not do that? If we are just continually shelving that and not assessing that, what are some of the, the consequences to those choices?
Yeah. So, can I answer that question and what I'm getting ready to talk about? Because it's exactly what I'm getting ready to talk about.
Definitely. Yeah.
Okay. So good question. Good lead in.
I'll take my gold star at any time.
Yeah. So the second thing that I wanted to talk about in terms of managing our anxiety and the workload of motherhood is our perception of quality versus quantity. And this is gonna sound a little bit different probably than you may think. But if we focus too much on the quality of our parenting, what happens is our self-worth is on the table, and it becomes about something other than just parenting well or parenting good enough. If our self-worth is at stake, then it means that we're going to parent from a place of lack, which means that we're going to strive in our parenting. The flip side of that I want to focus on is, and it sounds a little bit strange, but it's quantity. That idea of, so thinking about it like in terms of numbers, that idea of not being able to pour from an empty cup. What happens with most of us as mothers is that so much of what we think about ourselves in comparison, like parenting brings up all of our issues. And so very easily, we throw our self-worth on the table. And when it's on the table, it causes us to strive, which actually means that nothing is ever going to quite meet the mark. Nothing's ever going to feel good enough. That goes back to what I was talking about earlier from parenting from a place of perfection. If you think about it in terms of numbers, so make it kind of a numbers game. If you think about the amount of emotional and physical energy that you have, so let's say 100%, emotional and physical energy. So think about this. If an employer said to you, I want you to manage the workload of such and such employee. Okay, so I want you to think about spreadsheets. This is kind of ironic because that's like my idea of a nightmare.
Yeah, you're giving me a whole panic attack over here talking about numbers, but it's fine.
I don't do spreadsheets. I don't do spreadsheets. But so this goes back to the question that you just asked. So can't pour from an empty cup. think about it in terms of the emotional and physical energy that you legitimately have in a day. Think about input versus output. And I actually think this is a helpful exercise for you to do. If you were to write out on a list all the things like output, all the duties, expectations, demands, all the things in a given day or a given week that you do or expected to do or try to do.
I'm going to need a lot of paper for that.
Yeah, I believe it. Versus input. Well, what the heck is input? Like when we're thinking, when we have our self-worth and our identity tied up into being a parent and alone being a mother, and that's what matters the most, it's the thing that we focus on the most, we don't even think about input, right? In fact, if you almost all the time, and this happens to me, even though I preach self-care stuff, is when I do something that does not involve my kids, what do we experience? Like, we experience mama guilt. Even if I absolutely know that it is essential for my livelihood, I still experience guilt, like it is still present. And that is what clues us in to the fact that our self-worth is on the table. When we have our identity and our self-worth tied up into our parenting, and we feel that need to strive, anytime that we are doing some kind of self-care thing, guilt is going to be the experience. That's your clue. My self-worth's on the table. Okay, so think about input versus output. You cannot give what you do not have. What do we do as mothers over and over and over again? Somehow we think like more is better. I failed at this today. This isn't working well, and so I've got to push and strive because my self-worth's on the table. What does it say about me as a parent that my kid isn't able to do X, Y, and Z? I've got to push. I've got to strive. It's up to me because my self-worth's on the table to try to somehow make this different, okay? And that's where we kick ourselves in our own tail. We cannot give what we do not have. So when you all think about your spreadsheet, think about all the things that you expect from yourself. Think about the output, all the things that you give, all the demands versus input. All right, well, what does input need to look like? So, Brenda, answer your question really quick is, what happens for most of us is output far exceeds input. Okay, if we're thinking numbers, like it's not going to turn out well if that's the case for us, right? Okay, what does that look like in real time? It looks like mental health symptoms. It looks like anxiety, depression, exhaustion, fatigue, burnout, apathy, sickness, all that fun stuff, right? We are very used to running around as fast as we can with our gas tanks on E, right? In some form or fashion, it's going to catch up to us. So you want to think about, and this is such a challenge to all of us, I know, but you want to think about your input being greater than your output. If you literally, and I do think it's a helpful exercise, I want to encourage you to do it. If you think about input versus output and you list out all of those things, when you're looking at input, alone time, self-care, social time, sleeping, healthy eating, working out, realistic expectations of yourself and what you can actually accomplish and what you can actually do. one of the things that I have said to more mothers than not is, if you are able to do it, hire somebody to clean your house and do your laundry. Even if it is like a local high school student or college student, like, you can find somebody, even if it's like once a month. And it's amazing how much that helps, because I know for me personally, and I have learned this over time and have worked really hard at not feeling guilty about it, is if I'm seeing the number of clients that I see a week and attempting to do some small amount of self-care, I know that I cannot cook dinner every night, and I know that I cannot do laundry. I could not do those things. I do not know how mothers work full time and do laundry every week and feed their families. I do not know, because this chick ain't got it going on. Can't do it. So I've learned over time to not feel guilty about the fact that if somebody's doing laundry, it ain't gonna be me. And I love to cook, but I have to be kind of creative about it, whether it's like doing meal prep stuff, or, ordering from places, or, whatever. I have to be kind of creative about that, because I have to be realistic about what I expect of myself. So when you're thinking about input versus output, be super realistic with yourself about, are the things that I'm expecting and trying to do, like, is it realistic? Like, are there things that are on this list of output that I'm attempting to do, or that I'm trying to hold myself to, that I just can't really do and keep my numbers balanced out? One of the things, when you think about input and you think about ways to resource and equip yourself, and what that needs to look like, one of the things, social time, typically, social time, date nights, intimacy, all that stuff typically gets put on the back burner. One of the things that's so important about those things that I just mentioned is, kind of goes back to what I was saying about our self-worth being at stake, and getting so focused on parenting, perfect parenting, is all of those things that I just mentioned remind us of who we are, apart from just being a parent. Being a parent, being a mother, is just a part of who we are. It's not who we are, it's a part of who we are. When we strive and we try to parent from that place of perfection, it becomes such a focal point that it becomes all that we are. And that contributes to burnout and fatigue and exhaustion. And honestly, if we're real about it, it feels better to us to be lover, friend, sexy, fun, creative, social. Like, those things often feel better than being a mama, right? But we focus and, again, often parent from that place of lack.
Yeah, I would say too, just to add to that, I know, and I've shared with the group, like, the last couple of months, my husband and I have both sought therapy separately, less about our marriage and more about our parenting styles conflicting and how that causes issues in our home, especially having an extreme child. And I think something that I'm learning is that a strength of my husband's is that he can let things go. And I do not understand that. Like, it does not compute in my brain. If I have a list of things that need done, then that list needs done. And if he has a list of things, like if he's has his output list, or his output list, and he's got 17 things on it, and our son has a hard day and he's only able to get to 3 things on that list. He's not going to let it ruin his whole life. He's not going to let it keep him from sleeping. I'm on a whole spin out. Either I'm up doing stuff at 2 a.m. to get it done, or I'm stressing my kid out because I'm making him do stuff because it was on the list, or I'm fighting with my husband because why didn't you do this and I asked you to do it for the last week, or I'm sitting there in my bed not sleeping making a list in my head about, well, I didn't get this or this done today, so now I'm going to carry that over to tomorrow's list. And so I think that's something that can, if we're not careful, cause some resentment in our relationships if we have a hard time with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I think for extreme parents too, because our kids have more needs, like the tendency is, from all the families I've ever worked with, the tendency is that for us it means less self-care instead of more. But but truly, it should mean you need more input, right? Your output is bigger. The demands are bigger. The expectations that you have on yourself, I truly think, are bigger when you have extreme kiddos rather than less or smaller. And so I feel like that is a really hard thing for us anyway, but especially if you're an extreme parent, I think it's even harder to prioritize yourself. But it's essential, it's essential that you do so. Were you going to say something, Bryn?
Probably. I don't remember. Sorry, I was listening to my kids scream in the background. This is my life.
But yeah, so I want to encourage you all just to think about that, to create those lists, and it's kind of interesting to kind of quantify it, to think about it even from like a percentage perspective. Like if you were to, rate those things or give the things the output, the demands, if you were to give those things like a percentage, and you would attempt to at least kind of make it 50-50 in terms of input versus output, and kind of challenge yourself to try to maintain that for a few days and see what it's like. I think one experience is going to be guilt. That's fine. Guilt is emotion that we typically over attend to, especially as moms. It should be an emotion that we under attend to, or that we increase our self-care when we're experiencing a lot of guilt. But just want to encourage you all to do that, and to really challenge yourself to try to get those percentages at least somewhat equivalent. Now, the like super challenge is for the input to be greater than the output, so that you don't get the outcome of anxiety, exhaustion, increase in mental health symptoms, all those things. And I know, I understand that's a big challenge. And one of the things about self-care that I always tell people is, the more that we can create rituals of self-care, we tend to think of self-care as this like indulgent, lavish, kind of thing, like a spa day or a pedicure. Self-care really should be something that we think about in a ritualized way, like working out every day, doing mindfulness and breathing activities every day, breaks for ourselves, where you go pour yourself a cup of tea and sit out on the porch for a few minutes. Things that are ritualized are serve the purpose of decreasing our anxiety, both in that moment, but also in anticipation of the moment. You know, I always say that, like, if I have a really stressful day at work, knowing that I have some kind of self-care ritual, like getting to go work out, to kind of let it go, it helps both in the moment when I'm experiencing that, but also in the hard moment outside of that, being able to know for my brain to anticipate that it's going to have an outlet, not in that moment, but in a few hours.
Yeah.
So the more we can ritualize self-care, self-nurture activities, the better, the more bang for your buck.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. I'm not going to lie. The fact, first of all, I'm not, like, we're going to have to be on friendship timeout for the use of numbers. That was a little bit over. It was too much today. That's giving me anxiety. But aside from that, I am still having trouble just even considering, like, I feel like I deserve an award if I do one thing that's considered self-care. And I'm not talking about luxurious. I'm talking about, like, taking 5 minutes to breathe out. Like, I'm like, yes, you did that today. Like, way to go. So thinking about even coming close to balancing just seems ridiculous, like, to even consider that that's even a thing. But I almost think, like, back to sort of like high school pettiness, or, you know, there's mean moms too. Like, people who are like, oh, she gets to play tennis and do this and do that and go shopping and blah, blah. And people are like, but really it comes from a place of, like, longing and a place of, I wish that I could do that. And so I think it's really about prioritizing your own worthiness, and the fact that I'm not encouraging you to, like, take this out on your Amazon account. I'm just saying, like, to find whatever works for you and allow yourself that. And I'm saying this from a place of still working on it hardcore, because it's still very foreign and odd. And but I think little things, like you said, and having that ritualized time. And it also helps, I know for us, because my husband is not a planner, it's helpful for him to know, like, hey, I suck at mornings. Like, I am not a morning person, but mornings are extra hard at our house because it's just the hardest time for our kid. So I'll deal with the super early, and then I'm going outside with my coffee while it's still hot, and I'm going to read and I'm going to journal, and he knows, and my kids know, like, me and the dog are going outside, and that's what we're doing for a little while. And it's not a long time, but my days are totally different when I take that little bit of time, and I don't have to feel bad. Like, I'm asking my husband to, like, quote unquote babysit the kids that he also had sex to make. Just saying. But I feel like I don't have to feel bad about that, because, you know, he goes bike riding, he trains for triathlons, he does all this stuff that works for him, and never feels guilty. And I don't feel bad that he's going to do that. Like, I love it. I'm glad. That's good for you. Like, go do it. And also sometimes I'm like, I love you, but be anywhere else. So I think that's important for us to see that, like, those gender biases, I think maybe in my age group at least, which I think the three of us that are on here now are similar in age, I think that's an issue. Like, I grew up with a dad that golfed and bowled and did all these things with his friends, and that was a typical normal expectation, and my mom was home with us, and that's what she did. And I mean, she worked, but, like, that's what she did. And so I think that I just, you know, internalized that totally subconsciously. They weren't trying to project that onto me, but I think that's a generational thing. Now kids coming up see self-care is talked about a lot. Mental health is, you know, trying to be, or on its way to being, destigmatized. So I think we're working towards something good, but I think moms our age still are just hard.
Well, and not to be kind of stereotypical about genders, but it's been my experience, even, you know, clinically and with family and friends, that men seem to just kind of get that a little bit easier, like, where it's like nothing, you know, like, sorry, I go work out from 5 to 6. I'm sorry that there's other plans or other things going on. And I think it's a good thing. You know, sometimes we can feel resentment because we don't have such an easy time being like, you know, I'm sorry, I can't help you with that right now because I have to go work out. Like, you know, like, we would just, it feels so terrible to say. And I think women struggle with that, but I do feel like men kind of get that a little bit better. Like, feel I feel a little bit more empowered to just prioritize that. And I honestly think, think it's a good thing. One other thing too, it's like, it's sort of a challenging thought, but it's like, why do we feel like our children, who we are the ones raising, are worth more than we are?
Yeah.
It's reflective in our time and the way that we manage and handle things. Our behavior reflects the fact that we feel like our children are worth more than we are, yet we are the people raising them.
Yeah, and they're watching us. And I think my friend Bree Schmidt, who writes at the Thinking Branch, she all she talks about is self-care. She's like a freaking wizard at self-care. And she would always tell me, if I was getting down on myself, she'd be like, okay, now if Sparrow, my daughter, if Sparrow came to you and said this exact same thing, what would you tell her? And I'm like, all right, again with your wizardry. And because obviously we want the best for our kids. We would never want them to hurt or sit in their pain or, not past a healthy point. We would want them to take care of themselves and to be mentally healthy and physically and all those things. But for some reason, like you're saying, like, it's just, we don't feel like that's a part of our lives. But just like I watched my mom do that, neglect herself while my dad was out doing his thing. And then he was a lot more mentally healthy and able to be present and stuff. Whereas she wasn't, because she didn't say, hey, like, I'm going and doing this with my friends, like, peace, figure it out.
Yeah. And that's why we have to be okay with the good enough, like parenting, being okay with the good enough, rather than parenting from this place of lack that takes us out of bounds and causes us to strive and feel like perfection is some sort of thing that we can, like, that we can work for, that we can, is a thing to be achieved, when it's not.